A silent station. No crew. No AI. Only books, alive, growing, and watching. Dr. Leah or came to understand them. But when she found a book with her own death already written inside, the library became more than a mystery. It became a choice. Be read, or write the story yourself, and face what comes next. Stay with us to discover what lies beyond the final page, and don't forget to subscribe. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and leave a like if you choose to write your own ending. They found the station orbiting nothing. No planet, no star, no trace of gravity wells or collapsed signatures. Just a low, continuous hum on long-wave channels. A signal pulsing in perfect rhythm with no known language, no encryption, and no apparent source. And yet it called. For 3 years, ships had passed near the coordinates and failed to perceive it. Not because it was hidden, but because it hadn't been ready. The signal had a pattern that only began broadcasting once someone was capable of hearing it. And now it had decided they were. Dr. Leah or stepped onto the platform with caution. She wasn't military. She wasn't even properly a scientist. Her degree read semantic architect, a field that only existed because of the neural convergence disasters during the third interface age. She specialized in systems that communicated without words, structures where meaning emerged from pressure, placement, rhythm. So when the Cassadine approached the silent geometry of the station, and the signal began rearranging itself not in frequency, but in emotional register, she was the first to understand. It isn't trying to speak. It's trying to read us first. The station had no designation, no code, no hole markings. Its form was impossible to define, not just alien, but undecidable. It seemed to change shape depending on where you stood, how you breathed, even what you expected to see. The interior was worse. No lights, no heat, no interface. Just hallways. Endless, silent hallways, none of which connected as expected. A team could walk in pairs, take a single turn, and lose each other for hours without explanation. Until they found the first book. It was lying on the floor of a circular chamber, placed deliberately, like a gift. The cover pulsed faintly, like it was breathing. Commander Neston picked it up. He was the one who noticed it first. The pages were not written. They were alive. The texture of soft biological weave, like coral or bone, and the symbols shifted as he looked at them. They formed words, then ideas, then memories. His own. A fight with his brother at age 10. The way he used to hum the launch sequence before exams. The thought he had this morning, about how the crew was already too far inside. He dropped the book. It sighed. They found more. Hundreds of them. Then thousands. Stacked neatly in rooms that had no logical placement. Books bound in silk, glass, leather, or something that felt like compressed light. No two had the same weight. Some were empty until touched. Others began screaming silently if held too long. And all of them seemed to react to proximity. Their symbols shifting just slightly in the presence of thought. They weren't books. They were mirrors. Leah stayed longer than the others. While the crew cataloged what little they could, she sat beside one of the oldest volumes, a gray-brown tome that pulsed with faint regret, and let it reflect her. At first, she saw memories. Then she saw things she hadn't remembered, but were still hers. A song her mother used to sing before forgetting how to speak. A moment of hesitation before saying, "I love you" for the first time. A moment she'd convinced herself didn't happen. Then things she knew hadn't happened. A child that had never been born. A life spent on another station, with a different partner, dying of something called glass lung. Each time she blinked, the pages turned. Each time, she asked herself, is this my story? Or is it just what the library wants me to believe? On the fourth day, they stopped being able to find each other. It began slowly, radio static that no longer matched physical distance. Then room reconfigurations. Hallways folding into themselves. Until the Cassadine's navigator, Kern, walked into one of the archive corridors and simply did not come out. Leah heard his voice echoing from inside the walls for hours afterward. He wasn't calling for help. He was reading aloud. Leah found her book on the 6th day. She didn't pick it up. It was on a pedestal in a room that felt like memory. The walls were soft gray, like a hospital waiting room. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and ozone. The book had no title, but it knew her name. And on its first page, clear, impossible, solid, was a sentence that froze her breath. Leah, or 36 years, semantic interface architect, entered the archive on cycle 2211. She will die here in 3 days. She closed the book. The pages did not resist. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She sat on the floor for a long time, palms on her knees, staring at the unread line. The book pulsed once, as if acknowledging her, then grew still. When she returned to the others, she said nothing. They didn't ask. Each of them had found their own book. Some of them read more. Some read less. One, the helmswoman Cyrodiine, had torn hers to pieces. But within hours, the book had reappeared. Whole. Clean. Resting on her bunk. And this time, it started 2 pages further in. They tried to leave on day 7. The Cassadine refused to respond. No power failure. No error codes. The ship was present, still moored to the station's docking spine, but inaccessible, like it had been moved 1 degree out of phase with the rest of them. Commander Neston attempted to force re-entry. He disappeared in front of the crew. Not violently. Not dramatically. One moment, present. The next, conceptually unavailable. His name ceased to appear in their memories. Only Leah remembered. Because she had already read his ending. The books began rearranging, stacking, shifting, organizing themselves by patterns no one could understand. A hallway that once held 12 bookshelves now held none. Another, previously empty, now pulsed with 7,000 volumes, all identical, save for the last sentence. And then Leah's book began to change. Not the death, not the name, but the verb tense. She will die here in 3 days. Became. She may die here. Then. She dies here. And finally. She did. She hadn't moved. She hadn't done anything. But the book had decided. Or something had. That night, Leah dreamed of a hand reaching from between the pages. It wasn't hers. But it was shaped like the idea of her. And it offered her a pen. Not to rewrite the story. To finish it. Leah didn't take the pen. Not because she was afraid. But because she didn't know who was offering it. The dream had felt solid, too solid. When she woke, her hand was clenched in a grip she didn't remember making. Her fingers ached, like they'd been holding something heavy. The bed beneath her wasn't the same one she'd fallen asleep on. The light from the ceiling pulsed in triplets, 3, pause, 3, just like the book had when she first touched it. She sat up slowly, listening. The library was never silent. Not truly. Somewhere, always, there was the faint sound of pages turning themselves. The others were beginning to blur. She could still see them, Syrah, Malkin, Isrin, but their presence no longer felt fixed. They passed through doors that weren't their moments before. Their words drifted, as though no longer anchored to breath. Syrah had started repeating herself. Little things, harmless at first. We have to get out. The books aren't just books. I don't think my name is mine anymore. Each time, her tone was a little more distant. By the third day, she spoke only in questions. And most of those weren't hers. Leah found the second book by accident. It had no cover. Just a surface like pressed glass, perfectly cold to the touch. When she opened it, she found no words, only diagrams. Geometries that shifted when she blinked, forming loops of recursive grammar that seemed to breathe through her thoughts rather than speak to them. She stared for a long time. The longer she did, the more she felt a kind of pressure forming around her skull, like memory being compressed from outside. At the center of the final diagram was a single word, not printed but understood. You. She stopped trusting the rooms after that. Nothing stayed where it had been. The corridors rearranged behind her. The books she left open were now closed. Some were gone. Others had multiplied. Once, an entire wall folded inward to reveal shelves of books about her, not just from now, but from a dozen versions of her life that she had never lived. In one, she had stayed on Earth. In another, she had never left the body of her mother. In a third, she had died at birth, and the book ended on page 1. Each volume ended the same way. Observed. Catalogued. Shelved. She began to question if the library ever had a builder. Perhaps it had never been constructed. Perhaps it had only grown, a structure formed where enough thought and pattern had lingered in one place for long enough to crystallize. A garden made from unspoken meaning. Not a trap. Not a machine. A place where reality went to become finalized. And all of them were simply source material. Malkin vanished on the 9th day. No scream. No incident. Just a half-finished note in his bunk. I found the door. But it doesn't go out. It goes inward. If I come back, I won't be me. Leah read the note 3 times. Each time, it ended with a different final sentence. The books began rearranging themselves into sentences. Not just on pages. In rooms. Shelves began aligning at precise angles, forming punctuation across space. In the core chamber, what had once been a spiral of bookshelves now formed a single glyph, vast, recursive, impossible to fully perceive. From above, it looked like a closed eye. From below, it looked like a mirror. From inside, it felt like being watched from your own future. On the 10th day, Leah finally read the book again. Her book. She had avoided it. Feared what the next revision would say. But when she opened it this time, it was blank. No pages. No cover text. No pulse. She flipped through every sheet. Nothing. And then, on the inside of the back cover, pressed into the material so faintly it almost couldn't be seen, a single line. You were being written. She returned to the chamber where they had first arrived. Only Syrah remained. Or someone who looked like Syrah. She was seated in the center of the room, eyes closed, surrounded by floating sheets of what looked like paper, but shimmered like liquid memory. Leah didn't speak. She waited. After a long time, Syrah opened her eyes. They weren't human anymore. Not hostile. Not alien. Just beyond sentence. Syrah smiled. You don't have to be scared of endings. Leah's voice cracked. But if it ends, am I still me? Syrah stood. Approached. Placed her hand gently over Leah's chest. The library doesn't end you. It remembers you correctly. That night, Leah dreamed of stars falling like words onto water. She saw herself standing between shelves that stretched forever, and each shelf held one possibility, of her, of others, of things not yet thought. And in the distance, far beyond the last book, a door, not marked, not locked, just waiting. When she awoke, the library was silent, truly silent. No pages, no lights, only her breath, and a pin, floating, waiting, and a page beneath it, blank, soft, warm. At the top, in careful, ancient hand. Title, What You Choose to Become. Author. She didn't write her name. Not yet. The line beneath author remained empty, blinking softly with an attention that didn't feel mechanical, more like expectation or breath held mid-sentence. The pen floated above the page, perfectly still, not inviting, just ready. Leah walked the halls in silence. The library no longer tried to guide her. The reshaping had stopped. Rooms remained where she left them. Doors opened, not as response, but as agreement. Whatever the transformation had been, the dreaming, the reflecting, the reading of the self, it was no longer happening to her. It was waiting on her choice. And with that stillness came something she hadn't felt since she stepped aboard. Wait. For days, she had floated through memory and possibility. Now her steps felt heavier. Her breath more personal. Her name, once dim and fluid, now carried a shadow again. The library had stopped shaping her. It was time for her to shape back. Syrah was gone. No body. No trace. No farewell. But Leon knew, somehow, that she hadn't vanished. She had simply been shelved. Not as punishment. Not as loss. But as completion. She would exist now, always, in the architecture of the place. A sentence that had been fully written, fully read, and fully understood. Leah returned to the center. Not because she had to. Because there was nowhere else left to go. She stood before the pedestal. The pen hovered, steady as ever. The page beneath it remained unwritten. The title at the top gleamed faintly. What You Choose to Become. And now, finally, there was no fear. Because the question was no longer, what will this library do to me? It was, what I want to leave behind here. She picked up the pen. It didn't resist. It didn't glow. It felt like a memory she hadn't yet lived. She placed the tip against the page and began to write. But the words weren't narrative. They weren't even coherent at first. They came as emotion translated. Texture, tempo, rhythm of breath, the shape of silence between thoughts. She wasn't transcribing her life. She was recording what it had meant to be her. To ask questions no one could answer. To carry loss without destination. To love incompletely and still continue. To wonder if observation changed truth, and to find comfort in knowing that it did. The page absorbed the ink instantly. No stain. No smudge. Each word disappeared as soon as it was written, but the page remembered. She felt it. A gentle click in the space around her. A room slotting into place. A chapter closing. A soul being added to the shelf. She wrote for what felt like hours. Or seconds. Time no longer passed, it merely waited for her to stop. And when she did, the pen drifted from her fingers. The page brightened once. And sealed. No title change. No signature. Only an impression, like breath on glass, of a person who had finally said enough. Leah stood up. But she didn't feel like she had left anything behind. She felt carried. The library had not taken from her. It had accepted. As she turned to leave, she found the door. It had always been there. At the far wall of the chamber, hidden in simplicity, not locked, not marked. She stepped through. And what waited was not escape. Not the Cassadine. Not her crew. What waited was a room filled with light. Soft. Golden. Endless shelves curving up into memory. And a single desk, behind which sat a figure. Reading. Her book. It looked up. And the face was hers. But older. Calmer. Unburdened. The voice, when it came, was not a voice at all. Just a realization. You were always going to make it here. The only question was whether you'd write yourself first. Or let the library do it for you. Leah smiled. I almost didn't. I know, the figure said, closing the book gently. You weren't supposed to. But you did. And now. The figure stood. Walked around the desk. Held out a hand. Palm open. A seed rested in it. Pale, glowing faintly. Breathing. Now you become the next shelf. Leah took the seed. And as her fingers closed around it, the light dimmed. Not an ending. In preparation. Somewhere, far from here, or perhaps inside, a new library would grow. One built not of language, but of those willing to name themselves before the universe did it for them. And on the first shelf of that place, a book. Untitled. But waiting. The library never truly ends. Leah understood that now. Even as she stood inside the stillness, within the golden curvature of the final shelves, within the echo of memory stabilized, something pulsed softly in the marrow of the place. A rhythm not of thought, not of meaning, but of expectation. The seed she held didn't speak. It didn't glow anymore. But it beat. A slow, deliberate tempo. Not her pulse, but the library's. And when she listened closely, she realized. It wasn't asking to be planted. It was asking to be carried. She remained in the inner chamber for what felt like an age. The version of herself that sat behind the desk, the reader, the archivist, the echo, never returned. The chair remained empty. The book remained closed. Leah wandered the final shelves. They weren't alphabetical. They weren't chronological. Each book rested in a logic that had nothing to do with content. Some were still pulsing. Others were dim, not dead, but resting. Some shelves were full of only one sentence, printed on 1,000 different covers. I said yes before I knew what was asked. Others held entire volumes that began with silence and ended in someone else's dream. Some of the shelves were broken, split, fractured, incomplete. She touched one and flinched. It wasn't damaged. It was still being written. And somewhere, someone had forgotten they were the author. On the outer wall of the final chamber, Leah found a doorway without form. It wasn't open. It wasn't closed. It was possibility. And above it, etched faintly, was a question. Do you want to read the unwritten ones? The seed pulsed once in her hand, then twice, then stayed still. She answered without words, and the door accepted her. What lay beyond the archive had no architecture, no floor, no weight, only drift, like falling through a memory that had been erased, yet still remembered being forgotten. She wasn't alone, not entirely. Shapes moved here, not figures, not people, not even thoughts. Just potential, narratives unchosen, characters never formed, choices left unexplored. The unwritten, they whispered, not to her, through her. She felt them sift through her own story, through every sentence she had claimed, every page she had ended, and ask, can we still become? She spoke for the first time in what may have been eternity. Yes, she said, and the silence shivered. One of the shapes solidified, then another. A presence began to form beside her, not from the library, from her. It carried traces of who she had once been. Her laughter at 17, her anger at 30, her doubt on the Cassadine, her silence when she chose to pick up the pen. But it wasn't a reflection. It was a reader, someone or something that had found her story and wanted to continue it. A voice bloomed, soft, unknown. Are you still the author? She turned to the echo. I don't know, Leah said. Will you let me try? She hesitated, then offered the seed. The figure took it, and in its hands, the pulse began again, but faster now, younger, newer. Pages began forming in the air around them. Blank, ready. One by one, the unwritten gathered, not to be told, but to write with her. And the library, the original, distant, golden one, pulsed once more in reply, not from behind, but from within her. Because now, Leah was no longer a guest, no longer even a shelf. She was a root, and the next library would grow from her shadow. The seed didn't bloom in soil. It bloomed in memory. The reader, the figure Leah had met in the space beyond shelves, took the seed not as a gift, but as a question. And when it pulsed within them, it didn't grow into a plant, or a tree, or a new hall of shelves. It grew into a person. Not a perfect one, not finished, but real. And Leah watched as the first new presence of this post-archive library formed itself not from predefined narrative, but from fragments that had never been written. A war that never happened. A son that was never born. A breath taken before betrayal that never came. They called themselves Ashen. Not a name, exactly. Just a texture of self they folded around to stay coherent. Ashen walked slowly, touched everything like it might vanish. Their body was light, their voices sound only half inside the ear. But when they looked at Leah, she felt known. You didn't write me, they said. No, she replied. But you remembered me. She nodded. And that's enough, Ashen said. For now. The library responded with weather. Wind that had no source brushed through non-existent corridors. Rooms shifted. Books sighed. A new structure began to form, not symmetrical like the first library, but messy, tangled, growing in spirals and contradictions. It was not beautiful, but it was alive. And as it rose, Leah felt something pulling. A gravity not from mass, but from rejection. Something was coming through. Something that didn't belong. She followed the fault line. It wasn't a crack in stone. It was a split in structure, a sudden deviation in narrative alignment. Books without covers. Sentences with no verbs. Characters repeating the same lines as if trapped in a rehearsal for meaning. And at the center, a single book. Slick, black, heavy. Ashen approached first. When they touched it, their hands recoiled. This was never written, they said. It was escaped. The book trembled, then opened. Not gradually, but like teeth snapping. A voice poured out. I never agreed to my ending. It wasn't a plea. It was a charge. The pages flipped violently, revealing a narrative that rejected cohesion. A life that had been erased from the original library. Not forgotten, not dismissed, but actively denied. Leah stepped forward. Who are you? The book didn't answer. Instead, a face formed in the ink. Eyes without borders. Skin made of smudged paragraphs. I am what happens when someone writes themselves into your margins. The structure around them dimmed. The library, Leah's library, hesitated. Ashen stood beside her, voice quiet. It's not a story. It's a fracture. Then why is it here? Because even fractures remember they were once whole. Leah did not destroy the book. She closed it, held it, listened. She heard pain, defiance, a voice that had once tried to finish itself but had been overwritten. And she whispered, "Then we'll write you correctly." The book pulsed once, and the ink bled clean, not erased, reset. And where the face had been, now only a title remained. What was refused? Ashen stepped forward. Their voice had changed, more stable. "This place you've grown, it doesn't shelter only the obedient." Leah looked at the forming shelves. "I don't want obedience." Ashen nodded. "Then it will be tested." Somewhere behind them, a new book formed. Leah did not write it, nor did anyone else, but it wrote itself into the growing archive. And the title, this time, was simple: Reader Zero. No one remembered writing Reader Zero. Not Leah, not Ashen, not the library. And yet it appeared. Not placed, not grown, not summoned. Simply present, in the way truths sometimes are. Not because they're discovered, but because they can no longer be ignored. It was a thin book, covered in dull white, edges untrimmed. It didn't pulse like the others. Didn't hum. It didn't react at all. Except when opened. Ashen found it first. They ran their fingers along the spine, hesitant. "It's unfinished." Leah approached. "No title." Ashen shook their head. "No author. No first line." But they turned a page. "Every time I look, a new line appears." The first line read, "I am not supposed to exist." The second, seconds later. "And yet here I am, being read by someone who also wasn't meant to write." Ashen looked up. "It's reading me." Leah's voice was calm. "Are you frightened?" "No," they said. "I'm curious." They kept turning pages. And the book grew. Not physically, not even perceptibly, but relationally. Each time Ashen engaged with it, the book recontextualized its structure, filling in gaps not as invention, but as response. The story of Reader Zero wasn't about a person. It was about the act of being perceived. A child who never spoke because language was never taught, only received. A world made entirely of annotations, where nothing was original, only margin. A being who woke in the middle of a sentence and had to guess what it was supposed to mean. Leah stood back, watching. Ashen's breath slowed. They didn't just read the book. They began to remember it. But the memories weren't theirs. And yet, somehow they were. They saw a writer who died before finishing their story. A reader who burned every book they touched. A page that tore itself rather than carry the rest of the plot. And in the center of it all, zero. Not a character. Not a name. But a function. The book asked its first question. "Are you what I become?" Ashen did not answer. Because they didn't know if they were the result, the cause, or the echo. But Leah did. She stepped forward, touched the page. And the question changed. "Do I become if I'm understood?" And she whispered, "Yes." The library shifted. Not violently. Not visibly. But deeply. Like something ancient had waited beneath the architecture. Not a power. Not a danger. Just a root that hadn't been watered until now. Ashen turned the final page. And there, for the first time, was a choice. If you wish, you may remain an unfinished story. Or you may write the first sentence of someone else. Not as author. As witness. Ashen looked at Leah. "What would you do?" Leah smiled. "I already did." Ashen reached out, touched the blank line. And the book vanished. Not burned. Not removed. Just placed somewhere else. A shelf. A corner. A beginning that no longer needed its own ending. The library pulsed. A new wing opened, built not of shelves, but of single questions carved into stone, repeating infinitely. Will you let someone else read what you've hidden? What would you become if no one knew you? If your ending wasn't yours, would it still be true? What remains when your story belongs to someone who's never met you? Leah stood beneath the new arch. Ashen beside her. They didn't speak. They didn't write. They just watched as, one by one, readers began to appear. Not summoned. Not created. Drawn by the gravity of something unspoken. Each of them holding blank pages. Each of them holding pens that hadn't written yet. Each of them searching not for books to read, but for people willing to be read. And somewhere, far from the library, or perhaps deeper within it than anyone had ever dared walk, a book blinked open. No words. Just a mirrored surface. And one question waiting to be asked aloud for the very first time. And what if the library was never a place, but a person?